Check. Of Friday Lives. Oops. I'll go back a slide here. We have a really great guest, Fred Illies from UX Edge. I met Fred, I guess, maybe about 3 years ago or so. Mm-hmm. And he asked us to build an app for him. And actually, it's this app here that he's going to be talking about. And I had never worked with a real UX designer before. I've worked with people who are pretty good with UX, but I can honestly say that working with a designer from that point forward, at first I pushed back a lot as a dev, but he was a client at that time, so I couldn't really push back. Yeah, I couldn't really say too much, and he'd come back and, Charles, this is a pixel off here, and a pixel off, and it drove me nuts. But I really came to appreciate that level of fidelity. And we actually had to, at the time, we had to actually make some changes to Better Forms base code to be able to support some of those features or things that he wanted. So I'm going to pass us over to Fred, and he's going to take it away. And then after Fred speaks, we're going to talk a little bit more on under the hood from a technical aspect. This is mostly for existing Better Forms developers on how we're fetching data and how we're gaining performance in his particular app. But for anybody, even if you're not using Better Forms, even just as a FileMaker app, there's a lot of techniques that we'll talk about that you can definitely gain from. Okay, so Fred, I'm going to make you I think you should be able to share your screen, and then we'll kind of take over here.
Screen while other participants are sharing.
Yeah, there you go. You should be good now.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so let's jump in here. Charles, can you confirm that you're seeing my screen?
All good.
Okay, terrific. So thanks, guys. Ladies and gents, for joining us. Really excited to be here. Charles and I have chatted about this stuff to one other FileMaker meetup here in Toronto about a month ago, and that went really well. And as you might have mentioned, we were scheduled to do the same thing in LA at FM Disc last week, and then of course the COVID-19 canceled everything. So we're happy to be going through this with you guys now. And if there's anybody on the meeting who's from the Toronto meeting, this will look familiar to you. So, okay, so let's get started. So what I really want to talk to you about before I get into the demo, I'll just do a few minute kind of context setting here, which is what makes a killer app. I'm going to talk a little bit about good news and bad news, and I'm going to talk about a beautiful mind. And then we'll get into the story of the app and the demo of both the FileMaker Go app that I created, and then also the FM Better Forms single page web app that I designed and Charles built. Okay, so let's move on. What does it take to make a killer app? Is a big question. To my mind, I mean, that's my focus in my work is all about trying to create the killer app, and what makes a difference between a crappy app and a killer app, or even a good app, and the difference between a good app and a killer app, and what it takes to get there. So in its essence, the thing that it takes, there's three things that it takes to make a killer app. The first thing is it needs to be useful. So it needs to be an app that provides functionality that users care about. Now, all too often we get people launching apps that think, especially new startups, they think this app is the greatest thing ever and it's going to make people's lives easier and so forth, but it may not be something that their target market actually cares about that much. In other words, they're trying to kind of create an app and use technology to solve a problem that maybe doesn't exist. So the first thing is there has to be a good alignment between the functionality of the app and what the users need. The second thing is it needs to be usable. This is where we get into all kinds of trouble, where you can have a greatest app ever in terms of functionality, and it does exactly what it needs to do, but people cannot figure out how to use it. or it takes lots of explainer videos for it, or it needs a manual, or you need to, do personal training to show them how to use the thing. So it needs to be usable. And to me, the key metric is, can somebody just pick the thing up and start using it without any training? That's the holy grail as far as I'm concerned. And finally, the last thing is delight. It needs to delight the users. So you hear Steve Jobs talk about this a lot, or you heard him talk about this a lot. So it can be useful and it can be usable, but if they don't feel good while they're using it and they're not just delighted by it, then it's not going to be what I would call a killer app. So if you have all three of those things, you have a killer app, because you're providing great usefulness to somebody. So I open my app up, I need to book an Uber. So I go to book an Uber. It's very useful. It's usable. Yeah, they've got some issues with their app, but it's usable for me, and I'm happy because I was just able to book a car, and it just took me 30 seconds to do it. So I'm delighted in using that. And I'm not using. Uber was the first app that came to my mind. I do have a few issues with their experience, but um, this maps exactly with what my work is all about in the UX field. Because I'm really passionate about coming up with something that's all three of these things, and it's hard work, and it's especially hard work when you're taking like a B2B app or some kind of an enterprise app that's very complicated and trying to make it simple, which is why I always design mobile first in my mind, because that's the hardest thing. The hardest thing ever is to take a big honking business-to-business app and created a mobile app out of it that makes sense and it's easy for people to use. And I have a lot of cases where clients will say, no, there's no possible. First of all, my clients our users don't need to use this on mobile. So that's one argument, and that may very well be true. But Charles and I are working on a project right now, which is most of the users are in developing countries, and over, depending on the country, up to 60 to 90% of the people who access the internet are doing it on a mobile device. So that's really important to consider that. And the second thing that I think, the reason that I do mobile first is because it's way harder to take a complicated app and turn it into something that's usable on mobile, because you have to truly understand what the essence of the app is and strip out all the things that don't, that aren't essential to that goal. Anyway, enough about that. But that's what my work is all about, is creating apps that people love to use and that they find indispensable. Okay, so the good news and bad news. Good news is you guys now know what it takes to create a killer app. And the bad news is you can't do it all by yourself. And the primary reason for that, it's a really fundamental thing, and that has to do with a beautiful mind. The type of mindset that it takes you to create the code and the functionality for a FileMaker app, or any other app for that matter, any other developer, you need a particular kind of mind, and that's illustrated here by this beautiful mind image from the film. And that's a very, very different mindset than the mindset that you need to be able to design a user experience. Those are two different things. And even though, for example, I created this FileMaker app that I'm going to be showing you, but basically I'm a FileMaker hobbyist. I'm not a programmer like you guys are. I couldn't tell you what a recursive function is if you paid me $1 million. And everything that I built into the FileMaker, my FileMaker solution, was only so that I could bring my vision to life. So I designed the whole thing first and designed the whole experience. And then I was like, okay, well, how do I make it do this? And then I go learn about that. It might take me 3 days to learn about how to do something. Whereas you guys, you've grown up with programming and you're programmers by nature, and that's in your mind. So those are two really different mindsets there. And what I find is that you guys work in the sphere of functionality. So creating the useful app and all the functionality. But the other two sides of it are really, really difficult for a developer. to get their head around. And they may hate doing that, just like I'm not an accountant and I hate doing accounting, and I think it's partly because I'm a designer and I'm free flowing, and I'm not very like system. I'm not a system thinker. You guys are system thinkers. Now, there's a lot of complexity out there in the FileMaker world. There's just an example of some screens that I've seen over the years, and recently been working with a bunch of people who have had a FileMaker solution that's been around for 10 or 15 years. And so you get some screens that look like this. And basically what happens is they start out well-intentioned. They want to try to get all their functionality and try to cram it all on the same screen. Well, which by the way I think is the wrong way to do it. But that's kind of the database mentality. Here's a database screen. Let's fit as many buttons as we can onto this thing. I've seen screens where people have 70 different buttons of things that they can do. And the developer thinks that's a great thing because, hey, you have access to all this stuff at the same time whenever you want it. But they don't really understand how user experience works. And the primary concept that they get wrong here is cognitive overload. So when you give somebody a screen like this, it's like their mind blows up because they're like, what the hell do I do first? So we use in user experience, we have a concept called progressive disclosure that you may have heard of, which really is about hiding the functionality until somebody needs it. So wherever they are in their workflow, if they're starting here, they only need a certain bit of functionality and a certain things that they have access to. And as they go through their workflow, they would gain access to the things that they need. And that those things would be available to people, but not necessarily boom in your face like this with 70 things on a screen. So I'm not sure if any of you guys have ever seen anything like that or have to work on solutions that were created by somebody else in the past, but quite often that's a problem. But basically at the end of the day, you start and then you start adding things on there and you've created a monster, because now in addition to the 5 things that are on there already, the client needs to see a portal with some other bunch of information, and then they're going to add 10 more buttons over here. And then because we're worried now that we don't know if somebody's going to see this button, now we're going to make it red and we're going to make it this big. So it just becomes a nightmare, or in this case, a Frankenstein. Charles, can you still hear me okay?
Yeah, we're all good. We're all good, Fred.
Okay, good. Here's an example of one that was, actually, I'll jump back a couple here. The primary one that you're seeing in this center of the screen and the one in the upper left-hand corner are shared here with permission by a Toronto developer named Jason, who was working on something for the local liquor control board here called the LCBO in Ontario. And he's given me permission to show these. So he inherited this system, and that's basically what it looked like at the beginning. And he was showing me what he's been able to do with it. So he's a developer, and he's probably, I think I could say he's probably one of the ones that has done a better job of this. Now, what he did was he copied something, which is, to my mind, is a great idea. So if you see something that you like and think it looks simple, then sure, try to emulate it. So what he's done is he had a screen that he was looking at in Microsoft Dynamics, and he liked the way that it was designed. And so basically he took this type of thing and turned it into something that looks simpler. And I think he's done a real good job of it. That being said, I think that here's another one of his screens, which I would say is, this does suffer from some cognitive overload here in terms of priorities about what you can do with something. But my point in showing you this is this. You can read blogs, you can listen to a talk like this, you can listen to podcasts about user experience, and you can learn more about it. But because your nature is you're a programmer, these things aren't going to necessarily come naturally to you. And even though you can raise the bar and move it from here, like let's say this is the ugly version that we started with, and now he's here, a killer app is over here. And in order to get a killer app, you need to work with a UX designer who knows what they're talking about. Whether it's somebody like me or whether it's a student even that's studying that, but that you really like their work and you think that they get it. it's way better for you to enlist somebody else to help you with that than to start doing this yourself. Because most FileMaker developers that I've seen who have attempted some of this stuff, what they start doing is mocking stuff up and building it directly into FileMaker, like using FileMaker layout tools, which is, in my world, I never do that. We have our own UX tools like Sketch and InVision app, InVision Studio, and Adobe XD. These are like screen design tools that take you away from the FileMaker world and abstract it back to the design, so you can actually just focus on what the experience is going to look like. And you can create beautiful, like pixel perfect mock-ups and prototypes, which I do on every project. And I can actually get the client to go through, and Charles has seen a number of these. We just had another run through with one yesterday with the client, where we walk through and we're able to share a prototype online with the client that they can walk through and show their stakeholders and their boss and their customers and their users. You can do usability testing with it all before you code anything. So you make sure that you're out here and you've got the killer app, like you've got something that people are going to be able to use and understand and love. And you can do all that without even touching the FileMaker layouts. And I would argue that the FileMaker layouts force you to actually do things, because then you're halfway in, you got 1 foot in FileMaker and you're thinking, oh, well, I can just go ahead and create that portal now. I can just go and create this, you know, in order to make it look good. You're actually building some stuff. And if you're starting from scratch on a database that you don't even have yet, then you're trying to figure out, okay, I need a text field here. I need to add some dummy data fields and so forth. So you kind of have 1 foot in FileMaker, and then you get sucked down into the rabbit hole of development. Okay, that's enough about the preamble. Let's talk about the app. So I'll try to speed this up, Charles. I know we're
Oh, it's all good. I think we're all right.
Okay, so I play basketball and have for many years, and I've for many years have been managing the website and all the registrations and so forth for my men's basketball league here in Toronto. We had a problem. There's a number of problems in trying to manage a league, and it's all volunteer. In this case, we had a problem with the score sheets. So I don't know if there's anybody out there who's listening who's played basketball before, but this is a typical basketball score sheet. It's paper. It's written out by our scorekeepers are all like 15, 16-year-old kids who are making, you know, minimum wage for a couple hours while they're scoring basketball games. They're working it's a very fast-paced game, and there's a bunch of adults that are all jacked up on, you know, adrenaline, and they're playing. And if the scorekeeper misses one of their 3-point shots, man, heaven help the scorekeeper, because the guy's going to be over there yelling at them at the table and so forth. So the problems that we're having are multiple here. The first one is it's a fast-paced game, and they have a lot of things to take care of. They have to do all this stuff on the score sheet, plus they have to operate a score clock. And so I was like, God, we have to have a better way for these kids. We got to be able to help them. The other thing is, the other problem that we have is that kids don't add anything. Like, no kid knows how to add something today. So at the end of the game, they actually have to go and add these things up. And in our world, what they did, this is what the flow looked like. We do the analog capture on the score sheet. They would have to add all those things up. Half the time they add them up wrong. They give the score sheet to the winning captain, who would go on to our website that we were using at the time, which was called Team Pages. And they had just a god-awful form that you had to fill out, and it didn't even automatically add up the columns and rows. So you had to enter, not only did you have to enter how many threes somebody got and how many twos somebody got, but you also had to manually add up their score there. Plus you had to enter the score for the game. So sometimes those two things didn't add up, and that was a bit of a nightmare. The other thing is, because we were depending on our captains to enter these things, we have 22 teams in our league. So every Wednesday night we have 11 games. So there's 11 games that need to get entered. And what would happen is you'd get 7 captains would enter their scores on time. And then, you know, the rest of the captains would forget, or they're traveling or something like that. So what happened was the stats on the score sheet or on the website were never really up to date, because there's always some games missing. So not only did we not have the stats the standings updated correctly. Sometimes there were errors in the stats, and it took players, sometimes it'd be a week before they could see what their stats were from that game or how it impacted the standings. So I was looking for a way that would automatically capture that information. Instead of on paper, it would capture it in an app, and it would publish it directly to a website. Now, my goal was originally to create a mobile app for the capture, and then use an API to send the data to the team page's website, because they said they were working on an API. And it was almost ready. It kept being almost ready. And so what happened was Team Pages got purchased by a big company, and their customer service, in my opinion, went downhill. And my confidence level in them to finish this API and have it be stable enough for us to use and depend on went really south, because I thought if this API ever breaks, we're in serious trouble, because now we're not going to have anything updated. Our league standings are going to be broken, the stats are going to be broken, and we're going to be up the creek if we don't have the ability to do that. So what I did was I designed this app in terms of the flow. I created a pixel perfect prototype, which I showed to our league president. And over dinner, he grabbed it out of my hand and started using it, because he knew, he said, "Oh, I know how to do that." Like, I said, "Okay, so what happens if the blue team scores a 3-point shot?" And he grabs it out of my hand and he starts playing with it, and he starts, doing it. So that was fantastic. He bought into the idea and gave me the money, basically approved the budget to have an iOS native app built that was going to then send that stuff through the API. But as I mentioned, I was worried about the risk of that API. So even though I had approval to have an iOS app, like a native iOS app built, a friend of mine was going to do it. I decided against it at the last minute because I was too worried about the risk of having to depend on this API. So what I did instead was I created a FileMaker app. This just talks a little bit about the our kind of ecosystem here. But at the bottom in the middle, you can see there's a FileMaker Go app that I created, and that publishes the results directly to a single page web app that Charles built, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and I'll show you a live example of. These are the screens that I had mocked up at the beginning to show to Charles what we needed to build on the single page web app. But that's all built in better.
Prior to, like, I've been, like most of FileMaker developers, we've been involved for, since version whatever. This is the first time that I've received something that's pixel perfect, and they say, "Hey, can you build this?" And if you haven't done that before, like the level of detail, I'm not sure if Fred's got one of the examples of a blow up there of the level of detail. Yeah, there we go. So I used to show this to people and say, "This is what I'm dealing with," because
this is the idiot that I have to do work for.
basically, well, this is what I've gotten into. And, everything from the point size, the fonts and everything like that, it ends up becoming a real challenge because we're not used to building stuff like that. We're so used to putting our own spin and flavor on things, which generally is not necessarily a good flavor. So, sorry.
So no, that's okay. So basically, I talked with Charles and we got underway on the project. And so we've ended up is on the left, you can see the FileMaker Go app, and also the Better Forms screens. Those are actual screen captures from the app. And I am now going to do a demo. Let's see what the next. Yes. Oh, one thing I will say is in terms of the iOS screens, I tried where I could to use the FileMaker's ability to do to automatically resize the screens and make them responsive, but that works fine on a list view. But in FileMaker's case, have not done a good job yet of creating a responsive layout, a true responsive layout. From what I hear in some of the upcoming versions, they're going to allow relative sizing of items, which I think is going to be an important thing. but they haven't got that yet. So I was forced, because of my obsessive compulsive nature of wanting to make this thing be perfect in all the device sizes, I actually created 3 different versions of this layout that you're seeing, which I'll explain to you in a minute what that's all about. But basically, it's because I didn't want, and a bunch of people have talked about trying to different ways that I could have kind of faked this right now responsively. But the problem is, for example, on a horizontal, if we have 4 buttons across where it says 3, 2, 3, 2, that piece, you can set things to be responsive, but it only does one element to the next. It doesn't include all of them, and it doesn't do it relative to the size. So anybody who's ever tried to do anything complicated with respect to responsive design in FileMaker knows what I'm talking about. So with that, I am going to just quickly stop the sharing here, and I'll reshare. I'm broadcasting, or I'm plugged in from my phone directly into my other monitor. So I'm going to try to get that up and running here. So bear with me just for 1 second.
I'm sure there's some Zoom games that are like some kind of bingo, because my screen just went to an image of everybody. But
okay, let's there we go. Let's go to this one and share. Now, Charles.
no, I just got a blank screen. It says you're sharing, but it's black.
Oh, let's connect to your case.
Actually, I see a screen with what seems to be Keynote.
Okay, then I am. This may be a challenge here. Give me a second, guys. Let me just see if I can.
If you share your whole desktop, maybe, and then bring it onto the desktop, that might work.
The problem here's what the problem is. When I'm sharing directly from my phone via HDMI cable, it works with an external monitor, but not directly onto the Mac. So what I think I'm going to do is I've got a plan B here, which is I am just going to share directly from my desktop, which is this. And I can move some of this stuff out of the way. Bear with me, guys. Sorry about that. Okay. Now let me get into here and see.
Fred, just jumping back to that while you're doing that, and I'll try not to overload you with questions here.
No, be my guest.
So one of the old principles that many people grew up with is that everything should be one click away.
Yes.
But that seems to clearly have changed with mobile. There's nothing is one click away.
That's correct. Yeah, I would say that the most important things at any given moment in the workflow are one click, but everything else, for example, you could have it hidden behind the menu, where if you hit the menu, then you can kind of drill in and get to other things. But I would say definitely that you still need to keep that in mind, like the easy to click on things when you're in a particular moment in the workflow. Okay.
I see.
So I am going to, let's try this and see how this works. So I have a couple of different layouts here, a couple of different versions of this file. First of all, can you see my screen, Charles?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, cool. Basically, what happens when you load the app, and actually I'm just going to hide one of these down here. When you load the app, we get a list of the gyms that we run games at. This is a list of gyms. Markham Men's Basketball League is the organization, so it's MMBL. And so basically the scorekeeper would choose the game, the location that they're at. So they would choose this location, and it opens up and shows them. Now you're not going to see the transitions. That's the thing that I'm kind of disappointed about, that not being able to show you actually on the device. So you won't be able to see the traditions, which are quite iOS native looking. I don't know why that came up here. Okay.
Just
So
for a
yeah.
second, for the suggestion. I used Zoom the other night for a meeting, and I noticed there's an option to plug your iPhone in via USB cable to your Mac. And then when you go to share screen, you can choose the iPod or the iPhone or the iPad as the screen.
Yes, and if I have a Lightning to HDMI adapter, but I don't have a Lightning to USB adapter, unfortunately.
Okay.
So thank you for the tip, and yes, I did see that, and I went and scrounged through my collection of iOS adapters and couldn't find one. So,
all right.
Anyways, so I'll be that as it may with the transitions. You won't be able to see that, but you'll still get a feel for it. Okay, so we can show the normally what they come to is they see the next games. But actually, there's no more games in our season because it just ended. So I have on the. Actually, no. And if I close this and open this up, it will actually force a. Give me 1 second, guys. It will actually force a reconnect to the server, and. Sorry for the technical issues here, gentlemen.
Yeah, because we've never have any of those ever.
Yeah, no, this is true.
Yeah.
Let's see if I can go back to. Is that located there? No, that's not. Let's go here. Stable. There we go.
So for the rest of us who don't really use Sketch, like I use a couple previewing apps like InVision app and Zeppelin and I only use that for the designer getting the information to me for surfacing that, but they're not really design apps. Well, InVision is, I guess. What do you recommend that we just not like? I totally agree with not developing in FileMaker. That instantly binds us to thinking in terms of lists and detail views. And we already start plopping tables and things like that on the screen. And next thing you know, we have a half an app built, which I don't think is the right approach. But what can we do? You know, is it more like a paper kind of thing, or some of the other mock-up tools?
Well, you can definitely. Sorry, Charles, I was busy doing this while you were asking me. Can you ask me the question again?
I said, so instead of using FileMaker as a mock-up tool, what something that we could use that would be worth our time to start to experiment with? Like I noticed that, you know, Sketch is really popular, and now Figma seems to be the new kid on the block for design. Is it worth our time to start to play with those apps? I know Figma's got a pretty decent free package.
Figma is great. Figma and Sketch and Adobe XD are like the industry standard is Sketch, has been for a couple of years. Figma is great. It's online version of it. You need to be connected to be able to use it. Although I think they do have a desktop app now. I've used that quite a bit. It really, if you pick any one of those tools, you're going to do well with them. Basically, the most important thing is what you do with it, not which tool you use, because they're all quite similar, Charles. And sorry, guys. Okay, I'll stop looking for this. So what I have here now is I have the version I've got a version here that actually is showing the iPad size. So we'll work with that, and I'll show you that one. Charles, you can still see my screen okay?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, cool. Okay, so we pick the game. I can flip back and forth between the past games. Once they're published, they show green on here on this list. I'll pick this game a dummy game that I just created this morning for June 17th between the Wolverines and the Hoosiers. I open this up. This is one of the screens that makes use of the larger iPad size so that I have the sign-in sheet for both teams on the same layout. In the mobile, in the iPhone and iPod sizes, this is just half of this shows. So just the one team shows at a time, and you flip back and forth between the home and the away team. But in this case, what I do basically is, rather than in the old world, people had to sign in on the sign-in sheet. So now what they do is the scorekeeper just notices their numbers when they come in, and they sign them in on the sheet to see who's playing. We'll go on the other team and sign in a bunch of players there as well. You'll notice that we have two 55s on this team. In our league, they switch teams every year. We do a player draft, so there's a potential for having people with the same uniform on. And so the way that we solve that for the scorekeepers is we allow them to add like a hint on there. So if I wanted to go and change this guy and say his regular number is 55, if he brought the wrong jersey or had to borrow a jersey from somebody, we can give him a temporary number, and that would show up over here in this circle. Or we can also say, okay, if there's two 55s and one of them, how is the scorekeeper going to tell the difference between the two of them? Maybe one of them has red shorts, so we put an R for there on this, and then we close that, and now we say 55R, so we can see his number is there. And once we've signed in all the players, then we go to the scoring tab at the bottom. And I'm going to have to reduce this a little bit because I'm on the iPad size. Okay, so now we're in the scoring. This is where all the action happens when the scorekeeper has got the game going. So you can see we're in the first period. If the blue team has the ball, then they click on and they shoot a three. The scorekeeper taps a 3 and then sees only those players' numbers who have been signed into the game. And I go and assign that by clicking on the player's number. And you can see for a moment there's a brief change of state there of that button. I'll do that again so you can see it again. I'm not sure if it comes through on the Zoom meeting.
It does, yeah. It's quicker than normal, that's all.
When I tap on this, like for a brief moment, I'm not sure how many milliseconds, it actually changes to orange just to show that I've actually done something with it before it disappears. And so you can see that the score is 6-0 now. I'm going to go in here and make this 6-2, and I'll continue on to score. And if I make a mistake, I can hit this button to take away the last play. Or if I made a mistake on previous plays, actually I need to just, that's interesting. Yeah, let me go like this. If I need to make something to change one of the other plays, I have at the bottom here, I have a plays tab that shows a list of chronological list of the things that happen in the game. So if that last one, I marked it as a 2, but the ref said later that it was a 3, I can actually tap 3 and it goes and updates the score automatically. Or I can delete these guys if I want, or I could actually go in and assign this to a different person. So let's see if this will work. So I'm going to go in and reassign that to number 22, and now it's made that event be assigned to a different person. If I carry on through the game like that, I can assign timeouts. So in our case, we have a 1 timeout per half. So the scorekeeper, if the white team calls a timeout, I hit this button, and now you can see that that little circle is empty because I've used my timeout. And if the blue team calls a timeout, their button also goes empty. And if we start the second half, that restores those timeouts. So I click now we're in the second period, so that restores those timeouts. And if I want, I can assign a foul as well to a player. And I have some logic in here that says you can see they have 2 fouls. I'm just in the process of doing the third one. We have a courtesy thing in our league where if a player gets a third foul, that the scorekeeper would tell the bench, hey, that person has 3 fouls, be careful. And if they get a 4th foul, they also get a warning. And if they get a 5th foul, they're thrown out of the game now, so they have to let the referee know. And then if I try to do something else and assign it to number 5, I can't because he's now fouled out of the game. So there's a lot of kind of state things that are happening there. This thing at the bottom is actually 10 portals with different positions that are portals into the attendance table, the players who are playing in the game. Anyways, that happens until the game's finished. And then once the game's finished, they mark the game over up on the top here. And now you can see at the top upper right-hand corner, now there's a button, because the game's over, there's a publish button. And I'm not going to publish this right now because that would actually publish it live to the Charles's app. But basically what happens now is totally magic, because I hit this button and there might be 200 events in this game. And the information gets to the server like in just an instant. I mean, it's like it's a second maybe. So it's really quick to publish this information to the app. When we first started this thing, when I first built this app, I was trying to do it by importing records, importing all of the attendance records, all of the event records, all of the fouls, all those things. And it was taking a long time, especially if you're trying to publish multiple games at the same time. And Charles came up with a brilliant way to do that by just packaging all the game results as a JSON blob and then sending that to the server, and then Charles's app then just unpacks that and creates all the records necessary on the server. So
yeah, we'll talk about how that works towards the end as well.
Yeah, so I'm going to jump now, Charles, to the app, which I'm going to stop sharing just for a second here. Let's see if I have this open already.
Yeah, I wasn't really working on that part of the app, just the website, but I feel for you because I've seen so many developers have the same sort of technical challenges where they're trying to take a whole bunch of mobile things and push stuff up to their main FileMaker server, and they're doing it with a conventional FileMaker connection, which can be sometimes problematic because of handshaking, slow connections, and things like that. So we'll talk about the method that we used, which is really, really super simple.
Okay, so you should be seeing my screen now. Let me know if you can see it, Charles.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, cool. So when you first launch, so the idea of this behind the single page web app was, and the reason that I wanted to create that rather than using the website that we were using, which was Team Pages at the time, and there are others you may have heard of like Team Snap and a bunch of other ones. None of them really did exactly what we needed, because what I was looking for was an experience that was kind of just the essential things that our players needed, which were 3 things basically: to be able to see their schedule, to be able to see the standings, and to be able to see their stats against, compared to all the other players. Those are the main things that were important for our people in our league. And the Team Pages and so on, they didn't have a very good mobile experience at the time, and they had all kinds of other things that were not like essential for our league. The ability for parents to sign in and see their kids' game results while the game is there if they're not able to see their baseball game and they can't get to it. There's all kinds of extra functionality that we didn't really need in our league. So I wanted to build something that was purpose-built. And so again, I got the league to agree to fund building this single page web app, which Charles did, as we've discussed. So when you first launch the app, we get to this. This is the home page. So at our division, we have 3. Our league, we have 3 divisions. There's some news section on the homepage that you can read through. That our admin has an ability to go in and make changes to the news there. Some stuff about our league and some contact information.
Fred, I never saw the admin side. So when they go in and make those changes, they can use, like, how do they make those things bold and whatnot? Are you using FileMaker's native features, or are you sort of
Yes,
inject?
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
And I can come back to that if you'd like after.
That's fine. Yeah.
Kind of get under the hood. So let's go into a division. So as I load my division, we get a kind of a loading screen there. What you saw was the load time for the entire division. So that's every single game in the entire division. And in this case, we've got the whole season behind us. So we have like 220 games, a third of which would have been from that division. So there's a lot of data that just got loaded in maybe a second.
Yeah, that's basically, in database terms, we just dumped almost the entire database. All the usable data that we need got pulled in one shot. One of the prerequisites for Freddie says, "I don't want any spinners anywhere." And I'm thinking, oh crap, no spinners. Like that means we have to solve the problem a different way. So it's pulling the entire database for all intents in one shot.
And what you'll see is as I click this button, I'll do a different division now, so it loads the data. But so you'll see the loading screen, which was kind of an animated GIF that I had provided Charles that basically mimics what the data is that's going to be loaded. And there's a little bit of an animation to it. So then you can see now it's loaded. So here's our home screen for the Champions division. And if I'm in the Champions division, this is usually the page in Charles's app that I would save to my home screen, so that I can get it without the Chrome as I'm looking at it on my phone. The goal for me was to create an experience that people could use on their phone, because mostly that's what people are looking at when they want to go and see when their game is going to be and what their stats are. If they're at the bar and they're all joking with each other talking about stats, they're doing it on their phone. So you can see it's a very clean design. It shows who's in first, second, third place, etc. How many games they've won, lost, and tied. The schedule tab shows all the schedules in the game. And we have a kind of a neat feature, which you're not actually seeing now because there's no future games. But basically, when they come to this list, let's say that the date was March 4th. When they open up this list to see their schedule, it would go to here in the scrolling order, which basically, so it doesn't go to the beginning of the list, which started in October. I don't want to make them scroll all the way to October. And normally I wanted to make them come to whatever the next games are. So let's say the next games in the schedule are March 4th games. But I had Charles knock it back one, so you can see that there's a previous game there. So from a user experience point of view, it's more obvious to me now that I can scroll that list backwards as well if I want to see the games that have already been completed. Okay.
Is that technique called something? Sorry to interrupt you, Fred. Is that technique called something? Because I noticed a lot of things that you've done that are sort of like that. There's a hint, like even to land the screen here where you see a partial one, that implies that there's something else up above it. There's a drop shadow there that tells you that it's kind of going underneath the other thing. Like there's a lot of visual cueing, I guess.
And that's visual cue is probably the best way to describe it. So picture, if you will, there's let's say you're looking at a mobile app and there's like a horizontal slider of cards. You know, like let's say there's a little card there. You can see two cards, but let's say that there's 5 cards available, but you can only see 2 on the screen at the same time. You make them a little bit smaller so that you can put 2.5 on the screen at the time. Right. So there's one of them on the right-hand side of the screen is like half there. So you know automatically, nobody has to tell you that there's other ones there. You just know intrinsically that you're going to be scrolling that because you can see that there. And that's one of the things also in apps that you need to look out for is what they call a false bottom on the screen. So if it looks like the content is finished there, but there's more content, you never want to have the end of the screen look like right at the bottom of an element, like on a web page.
Right, so it doesn't work out evenly.
Yeah, like you may, like on my, you want to show something kind of half finished so that you can know that there's a way to get there. Okay, just finishing up here. So if I pick a game here, I can see the box score, so I can see the points that are scored by the players on both teams, and you can also see which team won the game because their number is bolded and the name of the team is bolded. And in our league, we have blue and white reversible jerseys. So this represents which team is playing the blue visitor team versus home team. So the visitor team always wears blue. The white team always wear, or the home team always wears white. So guys know when they launch the app to see their next game, they can tell what, which side of the jersey they have to have on when they show up to the game. And the last tab that we have is the stats tab. So this is where everybody gets bragging rights to be able to say, here's I'm beating you, or they track themselves against their rivals in terms of the stats. In our league, we track the points per game, the points, number of field goals made, 3 points made, and foul shots and foul percentage and that sort of thing. But basically, these are tabs, like sub-tabs that we flip back and forth. And again, all that data has already been entered, has already been loaded the first time we come to this screen. So Charles has done a great job of having that all available so that there's no waiting. I don't have to click on this and then see a spinner for a split second, which really makes it feel more like an app. And that was the goal, was to make this single page website actually feel like an app. Did I miss anything, Charles? We have an announcement thing so that the admin can go in and make announcements about, here's one about coronavirus, that we've lost our gyms. They've canceled them all because
there is that announcement also shows up as a top, not a badge, but an alert. If you haven't,
it shows up at the top of the screen, but I
turned off right now, or you don't have.
No, it's just that I've already on this browser. I've already dismissed that one. So if I were to open this up again from a different browser that I hadn't dismissed that on, then it would show a red bar across the top that says, we've lost the gyms for this game or whatever. And pretty much that is it. That's the web app that Charles created, and those things work just fantastically together. I'll pause there, Charles, and see if there's any questions and see where you want to go.
If you have any questions, guys, either unmute your mic and just kind of jump right in, or you can paste them into chat as well. Fred, once you deployed it, did you have to make a lot of changes from your initial design?
I had the luxury of being able to see, to be right there in the gyms with the kids when they're using it. Which from a user experience perspective, if you're out in the field with your users and you're watching them do it, that's the greatest thing ever, because then you can see whatever friction points they have. So there were some things that we did change. I'm going to change my screen back to the app right now. Charles, bear with me for a second.
And while you're doing that, I just want to mention a couple of things. You mentioned SPA quite a bit, which is it's an acronym for single page web app, and there's another one that's a PWA, which is progressive web app, and they're almost the same thing. Single page app means that it's a modern application where the base code for the web page or whatever it is the application is loading, and then the application will dynamically change the content. So it'll load a new page. For example, you'll load the header and the sidebar navigation, and then it'll load a new page in between. WordPress is something like that. And then a progressive web app is a little bit different. A progressive or PWA app is a mobile first application, and it's a specification that came up by Google. And basically the gist of it is that it has to load within a certain period of time. It has to be cacheable. Sometimes it has to work offline. It really depends on the nature of the application for progressive web app. And it has to be able to be saved to the home page of your phone. So it has to have an icon and a splash screen for launching as well. And those are all things that this app does as well. Although it doesn't run off of line because we didn't have that feature ability at the time. And that's something that's going to be coming into better forms down the road for offline service. We're just starting to architect how that's going to work work now. But because of the dynamic nature, it's a little bit, it's an interesting or more complex problem. But that's something that will be coming up later on.
Charles, can you see my screen now?
Yep, it's all good.
Okay, so one of the things that, just as an example of some of the things that I tweaked, were when we're signing people in for the games, my original design had us. So if you look down here, number 46, I'm going to select him to be in the game. If I made a mistake on that, or if I'll go down to 99 and pick him and sign him in the game, if I made a mistake on that, what I had the ideal from the user experience is they would just check that again, tap that again, and it would uncheck them, like so it would unsign them in. That was my goal. But what happened was, interestingly enough, depending on the device that the kids are using, so some of them had an iPad, some of them had an iPhone of varying ages, and one of the kids was a Android only user. So really early on, when we were thinking about how much it's going to cost to develop this app for iOS and Android, my iOS friend said, well, listen, it's going to cost you like an extra $10,000 to do it for Android. Why don't you just buy an iPod and give it to the kid for $400 or $300? So that's what we did. So this is the league's iPod that we share with people. But basically, depending on the device that they had, the performance of checking it and unchecking it, like the scripts that had to run in the background, the performance changed depending on whether they were on a newer, faster device or an older, slower process.
This is the FM Go performance.
Yes.
Just want to make sure we get that clear.
Yeah, this is FileMaker Go performance. Yeah. And it's FileMaker Go performance running the scripts that I have here. So, somebody who's on this call might have figured out a better way to optimize those scripts so that it would be more performant. But suffice it to say, when I noticed these kids having a problem, because there was a delay, so they would tap this thing to sign a player in and then untap it. But because it took a second to actually do that, they didn't get the feedback immediately and they didn't think it worked. So they kept tapping it and they would get caught in this loop. So what I did was I actually made it so that, and because we already had this ellipsis with some other functionality that we could do with respect to their jersey, what I did was I made it so that if you click on this, in addition to doing these things, now there's a remove attendance button, which takes their attendance away from the game. So it's not ideal because it's not as direct as if they just tap this again, but it was one of those things that in the real world situation, we realized that this is a problem. And so I was able to make tweaks like that. There wasn't a ton of them, Charles, and the reason I say that is most of the ones that, aside from that, that was really the only performance one and usability kind of thing. I would
there were
say
to my knowledge, there were no major structural changes. Like it's not like you have a new screen or anything like that, right?
No, there was no structural changes. I changed the design of this screen a little bit. At one point, I had like an iOS toggle that they had to, click on to turn them on and off. But for a number of different reasons, like logistical reasons, I went away from that. So this screen was tweaked a little bit, but fundamentally the only other changes that I made, and I have made a lot of tweaks, but they're all just because of my OCD and I wanted to move something over 4 pixels or whatever. But that's one of the beauties of FileMaker is that you can actually be in there and you can make any kind of changes that you want to, right? Like if I wanted to go and change the design of the screen, I could. And then I had the good fortune to be able to then test it and have the kids, be standing behind them as they're scoring the game, and could get feedback from them where they'd say, I had a couple of cases where somebody said, this is kind of too low on the screen for me if I'm on my device. So I figured out a different way to present something that was a little bit easier for them. But
Fred, the ellipsis is a really common design, paradigm, I guess it is. Is and that seems to be a real common thing with many web apps that I'm seeing. Yep. But I noticed most FileMaker developers, we design our apps to not mimic what the user is using with the rest of the world, which is almost always a web app now. And is that necessarily a good thing or a bad thing? Like, should we start to be using more things like that so we can disclose extra information? Like we started to use pop-ups or popovers, for example,
Yeah.
and that never
Okay.
used to be. Now I see that everybody's using those things.
Right. And so, yes, I think that it's important to, for usability, to understand, and that's one of the things that a good user experience person would understand is what are the conventions that people tend to understand. In other words, when they first came out with the hamburger menu, which is the 3-bar menu at the upper left-hand corner of
Right.
a mobile site, which is most sites, like, people expect to see that menu in the upper left-hand corner. Some sites have it in the upper right-hand corner because they have their logo in the upper left-hand corner. Even that little change makes them have to think about where they're going to find that menu. So there's all these little micro interactions that happen in your brain. And there's a great book. I don't know if I have a copy of it handy here. No, I don't. It's called Don't Make Me Think. So if any of you guys are listening out there who haven't read that book, it's a small little book. Go buy it. It's brilliant, and it's about why would you make somebody think about something when you don't have to, and it shows you ways to get around that. So the reason I bring that up is because there are conventions. So in this case, the ellipsis is a commonly used element. Like Charles said, on a lot of websites and web apps and apps, any kind of modern app for a new startup company or whatever would have use something like that, and people are used to it. But the key there is you have to use things that people are used to. So for one of the biggest pitfalls that programmers fall into when they're putting icons, first of all, like on Bootstrap or whatever, everybody wants to have an icon on all their buttons. I don't know why. Like, they think that that's going to make it easier. And Charles, prime example, we've had this discussion, right? Where, if you have a left-hand nav bar, and there's even in your platform, you had a couple that were the same icon. So that was one of the things that I pointed out was, well, if those icons are like, if the words are collapsed and they only see the icons, if there's two of them that are the same, how are they going to know which? And icons, like if you take the viewpoint that you want to have an icon for every button, for example, or every action, then you're going to start scratching your head and think, what kind of icon? If it's info, it's easy. It's the little eye in a circle, right? If it's go to the next screen, it's a right-hand chevron. But there's a lot of cases where you have some action in your app, and it's like maybe like I'm trying to think of an example. Doesn't matter what the action is, but if it's an action that doesn't have a universally recognized icon, you're going to scratch your head and you're going to go through Font Awesome icons, or you're going to go through some icon set and try to find the icon that kind of looks like what you're trying to get it to do. And so you're going to be happy. Oh, I found an icon that kind of looks like that. So you put it on there. And if I did a usability test with your software, like if we got in like users who had never used it before, and I said, okay, now go ahead and export that record to the law clerk. And they look at it and they go, like they have no idea what that means when they see that icon. So if you want to use icons, always use the text with it, unless you're using something that's like a universal icon.
Right. So like the inverted teardrop for a map marker, that's like super common.
Yes, absolutely. Or a home, in the upper left-hand corner, if you have a home icon, that's going to take you back to the, everybody who uses anything digital knows that that's what that means. So that's why I say there are some icons that are more universally recognized than others. And if you're trying to use an icon that's not universally recognized by others, like for example, here's a good example. I wanted to use icons in the bottom tab bar here, and I had to pick ones that kind of went with what those things were. Now you'll notice that I have words on there. I don't just have icons, because if I had just icons and I'm looking at the middle one that says files and points, that icon that I used, it's like an exclamation mark. nobody would know what that meant if I didn't have the words underneath there. So now I've chosen to have icons rather than just words. So I have words and icons. You can have just words, or you can have just icons, or you can have both. I like to use both, but that's my preference because I think it's easier for people to get a quick understanding of what's there if you have both. And then if you pick one that's not maybe that universally recognized, then at least you have the words there to make the association.
Kevin had a good question. He's basically agreeing to the 3 legs for a killer app, but he is asking, he says there's a difference between designing like a calculator style app where and something like a Photoshop app. And he feels that it's easy to build a calculator app that's delightful, but how do you tackle a problem like Photoshop? And I think that's Microsoft Word is a good example, I think, of that, because they used to have like 3 or 4 rows of icons, and now they're actually reducing all of that stuff.
Can I think I have a good answer for that, or I have a good answer for that, and I have an example that I could show, but I don't know if I want to, because it's Charles, it's related to you. And some of the future work that we're talking about.
Oh, that's fine. Absolutely, share it. Yeah.
Sure?
Yeah. Those are mock-ups from Better Forms?
Yeah.
From the UI? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a really
Okay,
good
cool.
example. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So let me just stop my sharing here for a second and open that up.
So somebody had asked about what's the difference. So, where do you use FileMaker? Where do you use FileMaker Go? I think we all kind of know those differences. But where do you use WebDirect versus Better Forms, and where does that kind of fit in there? And we've just briefly looked at the Better Forms side of the MMBL app. But the main thing here is you have a couple hundred players that are all playing basketball games on a Wednesday. And I'm assuming you guys all go out for a drink, or some of you do afterwards. Yep. And I know when I see the hits on the server for that particular app, that around 8, 9, 10 o'clock, there's hundreds of hits, and simultaneously there could be 50 people all looking at their app because everybody's joking around. Oh yeah, well I got this and that. What about my game? And they're looking back in time. So WebDirect would be not the greatest solution because you have this concurrency issue of maybe 50 users. And that's quite reasonable to think. So in that case, you don't want to burden your FileMaker server, because that's going to take a tremendous hit with that, and your pocket's going to take a tremendous hit as well, because it's you're paying for those 50 concurrent licenses. Otherwise, somebody's going to end up with a really terrible experience. And these people are hitting this on their phone. They're hitting it from different devices and hitting refresh all the time, and they don't expect. They expect the performance to be similar to every other web app that's out there. And if it's not, then your app is not as delightful. So that's a really good use case for having a web app. And whether you roll your own web app, whether you build it in a framework like Better Forms, regardless, that's really the time to be using those kinds of things. We're just doing another project, Fred and I, with another dev who's online here. I won't talk too much about it, but basically the idea is they have a bunch of people who are making deliveries, and instead of having a separate app for these delivery people, the delivery person is just going to receive a text message. They click on the text, it jumps them right into this progressive web app. There's no authentication because we authenticated them with the phone number. And right away they're using it, and you can use it on any device, and it's not going to cause a huge bandwidth overhead either on the server or on their device as well. So that's another excellent time to use a web app versus WebDirect.
Charles, I'm ready to share. If
go ahead. Yeah.
You are for the okay, let me just go like this. And let me know if you can see.
Yeah, all good.
Okay, so this is a program called Envision app, which is what I use for prototyping mostly, or for sharing prototypes. There's a bunch of them out there. But what I've done is Charles and I, because we've been working on a couple of projects together, and I'm trying to get to know better forms a little bit. But I'm looking at it from a user experience perspective, as well as from a, wanting to learn how to create things in better forms. And so it's a kind of a unique situation, which I think is cool because I'm able to approach it from a novice perspective. So Charles sees me trying to figure things out and sees some of the friction points and some of the potential opportunities for improving things. So, and because of my background in user experience, I've been able to look at his platform and think, you know what, this certain thing looks a little confusing, or might be better if you did it this way, whatever. So he's been open to hearing kind of my thoughts for how he can help evolve the platform to be more user-friendly over time and improve on its already very robust feature set to make things even easier for you guys. And so he's constantly, and any of you who have worked in better forms probably know this already, that he's adding things to the platform all the time and making changes and continually evolving it. So this is part of that discussion, is to, in addition to increase the functionality of better forms, we're also talking about ways to improve the usability of better forms and make it a better experience for the developers. So with that in mind, we started having this conversation. And so I walked through and thought, okay, there's a few different ideas here. And Kevin, this is in answer to your question about the
hiding complexity.
deal with an app like Photoshop. This is a desktop app that's got tons of functionality to it. So the concepts are the same. So even though like a little calculator looks really easy to do on mobile, the concepts that I use are exactly the same. So what are things that add friction for the user in an existing experience? What are things that might be confusing? What are things that you have trouble training people on, or that they may not get right at the beginning when you first introduce a new user to the system? So for example, some of the things were Charles had icons on every one of these tabs. And in that case, I thought for this complexity level of the page, I didn't think that they were necessary. So recommended to take those out, to change the name of schema. He had a tab called schema, which is basically where you built the page using your...
Which with my propeller head engineer background, that totally makes sense.
Right. And it probably made sense for every one of your developers too. But if you're like a hobbyist who's coming in like myself and trying to figure this thing out, really what the nature of that page was, it was about building the page. It's about building a page in your app. So I recommended changing that to Page Builder, which I think he's actually already
that's done.
But the other concepts that we have here are, how could it be easier to, rather than having somebody just write the code entirely to create a page, it'd be cool if you had building blocks. And this is one of Charles's ideas that he had already started thinking about, but to say, okay, I'm going to drag a title bar onto this page. I'm going to drag a horizontal tab onto this page to have it be a little bit more drag and drop. And so we talked about the idea of how to make that happen. What's the other? One of the things here is the hide code snippets. So this idea of being able to look for code snippets. So in this case, let's say I wanted to add, so what you see in the middle is a representation of a bunch of blocks that have been added to this page. And then if you click on one, you'd be able to see the code for that particular block. But if I wanted to add another block, let's say I wanted to add a button, then the idea would be, or at least this is the mock-up, was that I would click on buttons. It would show me the different types of buttons that are available. I would pick one, and it would open up, and it would show me an actual preview of the button. And if I wanted to, I could view the code, but I could just drag this over onto the middle section here into the blocks, and then that would add a button somewhere in the layout. So to not get into too much the details of potential future planning for better forms, I will say that Kevin, to answer your question, is that all of those same concepts that I used for the mobile app to make that simple would be used on something like this. So who are the users? Always goes right back to who are the users and what are they trying to do? What jobs are they going to do? There's a great exercise that I use on every one of my projects. It's called Jobs to be Done. It was the concept was designed by a professor at Harvard named Clay Christensen, who recently died. I had the pleasure of seeing him speak in person, and it's just brilliant, man. But the concept of what are the jobs to be done? So who are the users? Give me all the roles of the users. Okay, there's an admin user, there's a truck driver user, there's a marketing user, there's a bunch of different types of users. And for each one of those users, they have jobs that they need to do. So you list every job that they need to do. So in this case, if I'm I'm a developer and I need to develop a new app in Better Forms, what are the things I need to do? I need to create a page. I need to hook it up to my, my domain. Those are all jobs that person needs to do. So then from that list, you go through that list and say, okay, now in the current world, like this is in the case of you're redesigning something that's already exists. In the current world, what are some of the things that people are having trouble with? Support calls. What's the biggest support call about? So you can sometimes go into the customer service group and find out where people are having friction, or you can do usability testing, but you identify which of those jobs that people are having trouble with, and then you figure out a better way to create that. And what types of things then could I do that would make it easier for somebody to connect a page with their domain, whatever. I'm not sure what any of the technical stuff, but I think that's the way you approach it. So it's the same. The short answer is it's the same for a mobile app versus a desktop app, because you're going through all those jobs to be done and figuring out easier ways to do it, basically. And in this case, so we have all these code snippets. So what was the idea that I had about that was to be basically, here we are on the home page for Better Forms when I'm looking at this registration. And if I show code snippets, now it just slides out a drawer from the left-hand side that has all this stuff. And then I can kind of go in here and do my thing inside that drawer, or I could just hide that drawer altogether. That's an easy way for somebody to get to access complicated information in a way that kind of gives them access, but hides it until they need it. Here's an example of the ellipsis over in the upper right-hand corner there. That would pull down a menu. In some cases, and I actually now that I look at it right now, I realize that the ellipsis, when used in the app like I did in a row, when you're looking at rows, it's good to have the ellipsis sideways. In this case, Charles, I just realized that this should probably be up and down. And if you look at any of the Google apps, you'll see why. Because
that's interesting. So the dots would be vertical instead of horizontal. I see.
Yes, and the reason for that is the way Google uses that in their app world is this. If I tap on it, it brings down a little menu that's just that's just related to this page that I'm on. So the action actually is, the thing that this icon is representing is this vertical list of items that they can pick from. So Charles, I think you should make a note of that should be flipped over sideways so that it's vertical. Kevin, did that help answer the question? And if not, what else can I answer?
Earlier on, he said, here we go. Yes, totally. Thank you, Fred.
Okay, awesome. Okay, I'm going to stop my sharing, Charles, and I'll
and actually, Matthew just had a quick question. Yeah, Matthew, just unmute your mic and just jump right in.
Okay, hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
So I actually went to the NMBL .run.
Yes.
And I basically had a question about how, I guess you pulled something off. So when I went to click Elite and it loads everything and you click a team, I was really curious about how all the images and all the stats of the players and everything seems so seamless. Even when you click into a person's detail, just detailed information, seems like it's already there. I was wondering if that was already loaded as soon as you get to the Elite page, or
What I'm going to do is I'm just going to call that up, the MMBL run.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
for
I can
anybody-
probably address that one.
I'm just going to have it visually on the screen so when you're talking about it, Charles.
Right, sure.
Okay, so I go into Elite. I see my list of teams here. If I click into a team, I see all the players' photos just load like that. And then I can click into Joseph's team page and it shows all of his stats for everything, including his contact information. So if I'm on my phone and I tap his phone number, it calls him. Otherwise, it sends a text to him directly from the device, which is kind of cool.
Right.
Charles, take it away.
Yeah. So for that one there, Matthew, what I'm going to do is we'll jump over to my screen probably.
Okay,
And I'm going to kind of continue off there. All right. So just I didn't clean up my desktop like Fred did. Mine's a little bit ugly. Usually what I do is I take all
You're
my
an engineer.
Yeah, I take all the icons and I move them into the middle of the screen so it looks like there's nothing there.
I have a trick, Charles, that I use all the time because I take so many screen captures of things while I'm doing my work. Sometimes my screen has 50 screen captures just from one session. I'll just grab them all and drag them into a temp folder.
I don't even have that. I have a little animator thing that says trash screens. I click it and a couple seconds later they all disappear.
Cool.
So yeah.
Because you're an engineer. That's why you figured that one out.
All right. So here was that, just going back to that edit page that Fred was showing. This is a before here. And it's not really fully done and it's not fully released because we just keep playing around with it and getting it a little closer. But this is how people currently edit things. They have to go through and they want to add another field. There's some JSON here and they want to add a button. So they would search for button and excuse me, they can see the code for the button and they could copy it and they would go over here and they would paste it in like that. And now this button would be on the page. Here is the new version. Or at least this is the work in progress for the new version. So let me go back to the old one for a second, because this is really key. We had 3 buttons here. None of them are marked as a primary button, but I didn't really think about what a primary action was until I started working with the designers. So there's nothing that says, hey, this one, if anything, this one should be the primary action, and it should change color when you start to edit the page, perhaps, or be disabled. So now with the new page, we have a primary action. And it's up in the top right. And the whole app will be converted to the top right because I'm not really thinking like a designer again. And we made some changes. Fred said, put this page builder page first. Put it first and foremost. Now, this one still has a snippet tool. That's going to disappear, and I'll show you how in a second. And Fred, you mentioned something about 2 fundamental rules, and I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, it's always know where you are and always know what you're supposed to do. Something like that?
Yeah. The very first primary rule of user experience is make sure the user always knows where they are. And in most cases where I see people have really confusing interfaces, that's the primary law that they break. So in this case, what Charles is showing you now is, so he had this thing where you click on a page, and it's still a work in progress, but basically, and I've had other people that I've worked with, FileMaker people in particular, who have actually brought users to the form view as the first screen that they're seeing, and then they have a way to get back to the list. But the list is kind of like the primary thing. So if you click on list, Charles, here in the...
sorry. Well, I clicked on pages, but it's the same. Okay. That goes to the same spot.
Okay. So... yeah, so if you clicked on one of these pages, you're going to get to the page view, right?
Yeah.
Right, so this is actually it's taking it to the existing.
Oh yeah, well this is going to go, it defaults to my old one. I have to
got it.
So this is the new one here.
So to answer the question, it's the idea of where the user is, helping them understand where they are at all times, and if they go into the next level, how do they get back to the previous level? So in this case, this is the new design for the page screen, and it shows in very large type at the top there as a header. It shows the name of the page, and then so everything that's happening underneath that is about this page. If I want to save the page, there's a button on the right to do it. If I want to if I want to go back to the list of pages, I would hit that list button that has a back chevron that would take me back to the list. So it's really clear when I go from between the list and the form view. Sounds like a simple thing, and a lot of FileMaker people do that right, but sometimes on apps people get that wrong, and it's kind of like the primary rule. So if the people are confused about where they might be in the app and what they can do at any given time, that's a problem.
Hey, Fred, can I ask a question real quick?
Sure.
This is Brad. On the in the upper right hand corner, you've got save page as a primary, but you've hidden the other functions in
Yes.
the menu. Why did you choose to do that when we have all this space? Of course, you know you can show whatever you want to up there, but you've chosen to hide some functions. And why is that?
So
Yes.
even before Fred jumps in, as you know, we do a ton of one-on-one calls, right? We have really excellent, I would say top-notch support. Like, you put a message in, we'll jump on a call right away with you and help you solve the problem and spend hours sometimes to do that. I sit and I've watched almost every one of our users use our app through screen share. And while you're sitting, and if you've never done, I've never done this before with FileMaker, because you're sitting beside the person usually, and you're pointing at the screen saying, oh yeah, just click on this button, do that. And when I watch people struggle with the app, then you can start to really feel the pain. And when you have somebody who's not a programmer first, they do something else first, then it's almost any app will become a bit of an embarrassment. So I see people all the time trying to figure out, well, where I see their mouse going back and forth as they have to figure these things out all the time. And that's one of the reasons. But sorry, Fred, you can jump in there.
Yeah, no, I just, sorry, was it Brad that asked that question? Yeah. There's nothing wrong with because you have the real estate there. Charles, if you can just hover over that ellipsis there to show what the other choices are clicking. So there's only a couple of other choices currently. One is about duplicating the page and one is deleting the page. So there would be nothing wrong with putting those things as secondary buttons up on the same row as the save page button. The reason why I think it makes it even more elegant is because those two are less often used than the other one is, and anything that I can do to simplify the interface and make it cleaner and easier for people to use, it's more delightful for them to use. But your point is a good one though. If there was something like, if duplicating the page happened all the time, as often as saving page, then maybe I wouldn't have done it this way. But that's why I made that choice. And neither of them is wrong. I just felt one of them was a little bit cleaner. Does that answer your question, Brad?
Yeah. So if we can even take a step back and make a generic rule out of this, it's that if hiding duplicate causes pain, then it's in the wrong place. That's the generic rule.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. And depending on how your users are interacting with it.
This was definitely in the wrong place here. It should have been maybe over here then, because people hit this by accident all the time.
Right. And then I'm all about hiding the delete button. Just
exactly.
So just to continue on, we'll just go this and then we'll touch base on the MMBL app, because I know some people are asking about that. So
and there's still an outstanding question on the MMBL app too, about how those pictures got loaded so quickly and so forth.
Yeah, I'll deal with that one if we have time. That one's a little bit more complex. So. Okay. If we have time, that's more of a better forms question, but we will get into that. I like keystrokes. Most devs like keystrokes and things like that. And these snippets are really, really important. So we put them on a keystroke. So now we never used to have this ability in better forms to do trays like this. And one thing I have a golden personal rule is I never push back against a designer. And because when it comes to
you've come to that position. That wasn't the position when we first met.
No, I've come to that. Yeah, you're right. Absolutely wasn't. But I'm part of the choir now, right? So now we put this in. Fred's got to solve this problem next. Is he had a button here? I'm not sure if the button. I tried the button there, and anyway. But so now what's going to happen is you'll open things up. You'll have a build palette. You'll have components. There's no components in there, and there's a mistake there. This is in development right now. So you have components, you have elements, and you have actions. So these actions are like script steps in better forms. Elements are like an input field, and a component, which is a new feature, is a collection of things like a whole sign up form or a widget of some sort. It's a collection of a few things. So from here, what will happen is very similar to what Fred's already designed. We've already got most of the stuff coded in here. You'll open up one of these drawers. They all have just a placeholder image right now, and then basically you'll drag this, and you can see how it's responding to the editor. You just drag it on here, and then the next step after that will be an intermediate panel in here, and you'll drag, this one's not quite there, and you'll drag stuff onto there. So we're kind of going in evolutionary steps because it is a big technical difference between how we currently have things and the ideal goal, but we can move in these incremental steps. And the nice thing is we can version these pages. So, I can have multiple pages running in the same app, and I can access those. So that's kind of just to address what Fred, the design that Fred was building. That's kind of a new feature that's coming out. And we'll have some technique videos on how to do this. One of the things that's really, really key here is Better Forms is built out of Better Forms. So our interface is built out of our own product. And what that means is that anything that you see in the interface you can do, and there's no underlying cheat code that is, we're coding this by hand, but you don't get those features. It's not like I use, not like I'm a database company. I use Salesforce, nothing like that. So that also means that when we have a new feature, whether it's from a customer or whether it's ourselves, and it's usually ourselves first, that we can add that feature in, and the ability to do trays like this. And this particular tray is coming out from the side, but you could do that in any fashion. You could make it a full modal. Things like technique videos, like on how to use keystrokes and intercept, all of that stuff is in there as well. So I'm going to leave this for just a second. I'm going to jump over to because we're getting pretty tight on time, and I know some of the people had to jump off. And unfortunately, I can't find my chat. Let me just see. I noticed somebody's asking some questions. No, okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk about how we prepare the data from the MMBL app and how we surface that to Better Forms, because there's some techniques in here that I think any developer can use. So first of all, the web app, not the web app, the FileMaker Go app, Fred showed a publish button, and you hit the button and it sends everything up. Instead of trying to connect as a FileMaker app to this web service, that's okay, but it exposes basically anytime you have a FileMaker app connect to another FileMaker app, that foreign app is everything that's on there is exposed to this client, the client app. And that poses a potential security risk down the road too, because in theory, if you could hack for the FileMaker Go, no, not Hey Siri, in theory. In theory, if you could hack the FileMaker app, or FileMaker Go app, you have access to this full cloud of data. So that's not really a great solution for software as a service.
I found this on the web where you could have.
Okay, thanks, Siri. Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Siri. All right, she's always got a lot of opinions. Siri is a lot like a number of my ex-wives. So always lots of opinions, and I don't pay them enough attention. Anyway, so what we did is Better Forms has an API built into it, and it's a REST API, and it exposes everything as a script, which makes it super, super easy. So basically what's happening is in the mobile app, it's preparing a JSON object, and it's doing one insert from URL with that object. Now, since it's a single package going back, and then of course, and that breaks it down to a little bit smaller, but it's a single transaction in terms of the lowest level of communication going to the Better Forms endpoint, which is connected to Fred's server app. That makes it super, super efficient to transfer data. So you can send, you can post, 200, 500K if you wanted to in a second and a half, depending on your connection speed. So the way that works is it's basically a script gets run in FileMaker, and it's pretty simple. And it basically, it passes the information into a key called data. And we have an endpoint called upload, and there's a slash on the end of an API string, and it's going to all be versioned as well, which is really nice. And it runs a script called receive upload payload, and all that's doing is that's taking that payload that we're sending up and it's putting it into an inbox record. The reason we're doing that is we don't want to burden the connected device while we process all of this stuff. So we pop it into the inbox and it runs a script on server. So it's a separate thread and it releases control back to the calling application. This is an example of some data that got pushed up. And it just says, what the device number is and the games. And then all the transactions, all those 3 points and 2 points and all that stuff gets pushed up. Once we know it's successful and it's valid JSON, we pass that back to the other client and its duty is done. So its concern is only to publish the data, and it says on the device the data was published. If there's a problem with saving and committing this record, all of those errors are always automatically pushed backwards, which virtually doesn't happen in this particular workflow. So you can see in this case, there's been 250 games that have been logged in with this method. All right. After that, there's quite a bit of number crunching that has to happen. So that is a real heavy burden to FileMaker Server to crunch all of those statistics. And it has to crunch them. It has to index the numbers and things like that. We can do that on the client side, on the browser side, super fast. But Fred needs those stats inside FileMaker as well. So there's no sense in just processing them on the client. So this is his graph here. And it's fairly well laid out. I think Doug did this mostly, right? Is that right?
Yep.
So it's pretty clean. It looks like his style.
My original one looked like one of those examples I showed you before with the octopus everywhere,
right.
And
so so this is pretty
kind of organized this.
This is the better forms part of this whole thing. I should put a nice pretty box around it here. And basically, we do this because then we're it's very little context. So we use a selector just to write records and access records. So we're dumping data into the inbox, and then it's using that to write any relevant stuff that it needs to. That way I don't have to work on this legacy app. Not that it's that old, but it's an existing app, and I don't have to look at any table occurrences or anything. There's no need to care about that stuff. Through his relationships, he's calculating all of these statistics. And there's some sequences that run automatically and generate some stuff that can't be done through a relationship. But what's really the real key takeaway is if we look at a given table, so we have a game and then there's, I think, some kind of an attendance record and there's some other record underneath it. There's a few records. But if you look at any of these given tables, we use a technique, and anybody who's developed anything in better forms already does this, is we create a calculation called as JSON. And what it is a JSON record, or I said JSON calculation that's a representation of the data that's in this particular record. So by fetching that one record, I grab all of the data, all of these fields. I don't have to individually get fields, set fields, all that kind of stuff, right? But there's a couple key things right in here. Right here, there's related data. And these two fields are referencing an as JSON in a related table. Now, this is the real key thing. And that goes down about 3 or 4 tables. So what happens is this particular JSON object, or the calculation, the result of this, is not only that particular game, but it's also every player's actions within that game and every piece of data that's related to that. So in one shot, to prepare the data for better forms for this particular app, we have this routine that runs periodically every 20 minutes. It recalculates the stats, and it's called build cache. And all it's doing is it's looping through, because there's 3 divisions. So there's a division list right here. You can see there's a FileMaker list of elite, champion, masters. These are hard coded in. I think Fred wants to later on make this more of a vertical, which that kind of stuff would change. And this is all the data this is all the code that it prepares. It's basically looping through those 3 divisions, and it's setting some variables, and it's putting them into a giant JSON object that looks like this. So this is just a cache here that's sitting here. And you can see that it has all of the information from that particular team. So when somebody hits that division, it's pulling 186K. That was during that loading state that we saw when he went from, say, elite to this specific game. And it's grabbing just this data. Now, when it does that, there's virtually no burden on FileMaker because all the stats are calculated. We don't need to recalculate the stats for every player that comes that hits it. Sitting around eating chicken wings or whatever. So that's kind of how that part works. Now, Better Forms as an app pulls that blob in, and it basically, it's not only single page as a single page web app, but it's actually a single page in Better Forms as well. So all of those pages, all of those tabs were just Better Forms elements. They have a little bit of customized CSS, and we're just surfing that data. We're just going to different data points, just like you would in FileMaker, almost exactly the same. And that's why it has really, really, really good performance. There's zero hit on FileMaker server. Every time a user reloads a page, it does do a query to server. That could be cached if we really wanted to as well, but there's no need to optimize later. So that's kind of the gist of how that works. I hope that answers some questions.
Definitely answer my question. And so another thing is, so I definitely understand all that, but I also feel as though in terms of the images though,
yeah, the images, what I'll do is the images, I'll deal with those separately instead of on this call, because that particular one is a little bit more technically complex.
Gotcha.
Right. We are going to be coming out with some actually new image methods or techniques that make it a lot even easier. There's a new custom function that you basically point just like in your as JSON, and it'll point to a container if you're using container-based images. If you're using external images, then it's just a URL. But with the app, it's the as JSON is producing an actual URL that it's pulling that image from.
Yeah, that would definitely be helpful, because right now I am base 64ing.
So when you do that, there's two problems there when you're doing that. You really need to cache that stuff, right? So the most ideal solution is to pop your images into an externally accessible web folder. But again, we'll save that for a different talk. We're really more concerned about the UX and stuff like that today rather than the technical aspects. But okay, so do we have any other questions? Oh, here, sorry, let me get marketing. There we go. Yeah, now we'll go back to that. Good enough. So basically what our goal is, folks, thank you for everybody who came out. We had about 50 people come out today, about 75 registered. So that's I think that's pretty decent. This is definitely one of our bigger Friday lives. And we want to have one every week for the next month or so, since we're all at home and doing stuff. It's kind of like a reverse field trip. And I think next week, Eric, are you still there? Are you still online? Okay, not you. Okay, yeah, I know. So next week we're going to feature Eric Luce. He's a developer, and he does some work with Better Forms, and he does some work with a bunch of other clients and things like that too, which is pretty neat because we're actually seeing a bit of an ecosystem around Better Forms now, which is pretty cool. And a few months ago we saw our first job posting where that was a requirement, so that was kind of a happy dance day. He's going to be talking about the vertical application that he's building right now. And it started off as an in-house app, I think. And then he's evolved that into becoming a vertical. And we'll look at some of the stuff that's involved with that. And we'll talk about coding applications for scalability and for software as a service as well. Fred, did you have anything else? Did you want to add?
No, I think that's everything, Charles.
How can people get a hold of you?
They can reach me at UX Edge. Go back one slide, and they'll be able to see it. uxedge.ca. No, maybe not there.
There we go. Right here. Oops, sorry. No, uxedge.ca. Yeah.
uxedge.ca. So my email is fred@uxedge.ca, or just hit me up on uxedge.ca and see some more stuff about me and contact information and that sort of thing. But I very much appreciate it, Charles, being invited.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. We had a lot of good, really, really good feedback. And it's nice to see something that's not so FileMaker. It's not, I had a bit of a Twitter fight this week about somebody saying that it's, we're just gilding the lily or putting gold plate on things by putting UX. And I think that's totally the wrong approach.
That's 100% wrong, because they think it's just the nice coat of paint on your old car. And that's not at all what it is. It's really, you need to understand how it works and make it easy for people to work and also make it look good. So all three of those things are important. And interestingly enough, if it looks really good and it's pixel perfect, like let's assume that you have all the functionality and it's easy to use, but the design is like the visual design, you know, the colors aren't right, or the pixels are off, or something jumps, you know, an element that's supposed to be in the same place, that when they go from one screen to the other, it jumps like this. Like you see this all the time in people's PowerPoint presentations.
Yeah.
That type of thing, when the design fidelity, that last step, isn't there, then people have less trust in your app. Like they've done studies, and it's proven that if your design looks better, people will trust you more. They'll think you're more professional and that you know what you're doing more, even if it was exactly the same code underlying it. It's a perception thing as well, right? Which is part of that delightful thing. You know, they trust using the app. They like using the app. So anyways, thanks again, everybody. And if you have any other questions about the app or UX in general related to something that you're working on, hit me up at uxedge.ca. Cheers.
Great. Thanks, Fred. And hopefully you guys can make it out next week. We'll try to stay a little bit more on time, but that's okay. It's Friday anyway. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody, and hope to see you next week.